So I'm Bobby with Tech Support here at REA, and I'll be walking you through Session 6 in the REA 9 mini-series, How to Use Groups. So Groups allows you to group your different contacts and properties together so you can then bring those contacts or properties up at a later time in one query to, for example, send a mailer or go through and research the information on them. Now, each of the different tables on the left side, you'll see a status panel. Now, quick note, if you do not see the status panel on the left side where it has the record owner, team, verified, and group section, you need to go to View, Panels, and choose Status to bring that back up. It's possible to close that, so if you close it, you just need to go to View, Panels, and Status. Now, where querying allows you to search for specific criteria, such as records that have stuff in common, such as the city on a property, the requirements for an owner, the tenants that are looking for triple net leases, and so on. Groups gives you a little bit more leeway in that you can have any type of record go into a group regardless of if they're similar to the other records in them. So oftentimes groups can be used where queries cannot, and vice versa. Groups can be used, for example, to make a mailing list of people that you send holiday cards to. There's not really a field in REA that you're able to query on to say, okay, well, this person obviously meets the criteria for a mailing card list, so that's one use of that. Also, Groups is used for what we'll be talking about on Monday for synchronizing your contacts with Microsoft Outlook. So that's generally one of the groups that shows up on the left side is an Outlook group that you would create. So to create a new group, in the group section here, just right-click and you'll have a few different options, add lookup, remove lookup, and so on. Select New Group. That'll bring up a window that says Group Properties. So the first step is to name the group. So in this case, I'm just going to make a group out of a query. So that way I can kind of go through the group and remove the properties as needed. So for example, I'm going to be using this as a group for potential properties for a buyer, and he's looking for properties within the city of Van Nuys between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet. So let's say our buyer's name is Randy. So we're going to call the group Randy's Prospects. Next, no, I'm actually in contacts. Hold on. I apologize for that. Just open my properties. Randy's Prospects. Next, we have the type. Now, by default, depending on which table you're in, it's going to fill in with whichever table you are in. So because I have properties up now, it's going to show property there. However, if you need a group that will bring up windows for contacts, properties, and companies, or any mix thereof, any more than one table, you can select Unknown from the list, and that'll actually make the group show up on all of those different tables. However, this is just going to be a group of properties, so I'm just going to select that. Another good idea if you're on a multi-user version and each of you is creating multiple groups that only you're going to need personally, it's not a bad idea to make this team private, just so you don't end up with a ton of groups here that have nothing to do with you. So it doesn't make the records that are in the group private, it just makes the group not show up on the left for anybody that it does not need to show up for. So once you have the group properties set, you just hit OK, and that group will now show up on the left side. So like I said, I'm going to be using this to vet properties for an owner named Randy. He's looking to buy a new property in Van Nuys between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet. So I can actually do a query and add all those properties. At its simplest, the easiest way to add a record to that group is there's a little box to the left of the name of the group. You just click that, and that record is a part of the group. So if I were to add, let's say, a few different properties here. So I've added now 5 properties to Randy's Prospects. I can now bring up those properties just by simply right-clicking on the group and choosing Activate Group. So it brings up just those 5 properties. So I can easily go through those properties. I can go up to View and choose Property List to see them in a spreadsheet view. I could use this to look up the linked owners of these properties and so on. So anything that works on a global scale, when you have a query set or you have a group open, is only going to have an effect on that group. So if, like, for example, you use REA to do an email blast out of one of your groups, you can bring up a group, do the email blast, and it'll only send to the contacts in that group. Or if you wanted to print out reports on these 5 properties, when you run the report, let's say these are all industrial properties, for example, you have an option for all records in current query, meaning the 5 properties that came up. I'm just going to go ahead and remove all the content or all the properties from the group. And now, once again, I wanted to do a query and add all those properties to there. So it's pretty simple. First, you just do your query as you normally would. So like I was doing, city is Van Nuys, and also the building size is between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet. Drill down and hit OK. So I've got 48 properties that match what Randy's looking for, and I want to add these properties to that group. Now, yes, you could just do this as a saved query. However, I'm going to show you one of the benefits of you doing this as a group as opposed to a saved query. So I'm going to go ahead and choose, right-click on that group and choose Add Lookup. Like I said, if you have a query up, whatever you do on a global scale only affects the records in your query. So it'll say, are you sure you want to add these 48 records to the selected group, the ones that we had just queried? So there we go. Now our group has 48 properties in it, and we can start going through, calling the owners and see if they're looking to sell at this time. So let's say, for example, we call Mofo LLC, and they're not looking to sell their property at this time, and this property is no longer a prospective property for our owner, Randy. Well, we could just remove that property from the group by unchecking that checkbox. If we refresh our screen here, now if we right-click on the group and choose Activate Group, we now have 47 properties. So one good thing about using a group as opposed to a query is that you can start removing stuff from the group as you don't want them in the group. So if, like, you make a prospect list of contacts, you can start removing the contacts as you realize that they're not a prospect and you don't need to contact them anymore. Or for properties, the same thing. Let's say, okay, well, we call the owner of 7062 Van Nuys Boulevard. They're not interested. Uncheck that, and now we're down to 46. So with a group, you can add or remove information at will from the group, which is something you cannot do with a query, because a query is always going to bring up all of the properties in Van Nuys between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet, regardless of whether we want them to or not. So a group gives you a little bit more control. Not to mention, let's say he's looking for buildings in Van Nuys between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet, or buildings in, let's say, another city with a different criteria. Well, we can then do a different query altogether. Let's say he's looking also for between 20 and 25,000 in Woodland Hills. Well, we can now do a new query. Say city is Woodland Hills between 20,000 and 25,000 square feet. And drill down. So, well, we have another property, singular. So let's say it's actually between, or any property, let's say, in Woodland Hills, just because I realize I only have 21 of them. So I can right-click and add lookup, so I can keep adding different queries to a group. And then now that group has all of the properties in Woodland Hills and all of the properties in Van Nuys between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet. So you can keep adding different queries to your group. Now, one of the primary uses of groups that pretty much everyone uses is they'll have a group for synchronizing with Outlook. So if you're going to be synchronizing all of your contacts with Outlook, one little tip that I suggest is basically each time before you synchronize with Microsoft Outlook, you should have an Outlook Contacts group over here. So I have one that's named Outlook Contacts Bobby. And what I do when I want to synchronize, I right-click on the group and add lookup to add the 1,230 contacts to the group. So there was already 10 in there. So next time I synchronize, all of these contacts are a part of that group. If I keep adding more contacts, I can just right-click on that group. Let's say I add like 5 more contacts. I can right-click on that group and add lookup. even though it's saying, are you sure you want to add these 1,230, it would just add any that were not currently in the group. So it kind of goes through and fills in the blank. That add lookup feature is great to add to a group if you're mass adding records to a group. And most of the time, most people tend to synchronize just all of their contacts with Outlook because it can be a little bit of a pain to go through and pick out the specific contacts that you're actually wanting to synchronize. So that's pretty much the functionality of groups. This is one of the shorter webinars that I end up doing throughout the mini-series, but that's made up for because next week we'll be doing how to synchronize with Outlook and export information on Monday. And that one usually actually takes around 20 to 22 minutes depending on what I end up talking about and how many questions there are and so on. But thank you for joining me today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and if there's any questions, I'll take them now.